history of oppression, enslaved people being exploited for profit, specifically within agriculture. Obviously, we aren't anywhere close to those wounds being healed. But the criminalization of cannabis has been one way to kind of further that cycle of oppression. So this is an incredibly important conversation for this region. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for that conversation. So just to open up, I would love to hear a little bit, because all of us call the South home, we would love to hear a little more about what the South means to you. Who is this guy? Okay, you that line.
Yeah, I definitely call the South home. It's funny, right now I live in Northern California. I'm working on a project with my partner up there this year, but I'm excited to come back home, and I'm excited to be sort of here in the South right now. It's just, to speak to what the region means to us. So like my whole family is from the South, and being a white descended person from people who are all from the South means I have a really important responsibility to both understand my legacy of violence and oppression and begin to end the systems that let people with white skin privilege pretty much do whatever the fuck they want, and then everybody else has to sort of bear the brunt of that. So I feel like in my lineage as a Southerner, that's a really important place that I am coming to all my work from. I can stop there.
Oh no, it's interesting that the South has a history of rebellion, people pushing back.
Yeah, so for me, I'm currently working in Richmond, Virginia, but I'm also from Richmond as well. And I think for me, being from the area, well, it's been a little bit complicated because Richmond has a lot of history, former capital of the Confederacy. And so I would have never thought as an adult that I would still live there now. I just wanted to get out and never come back, but I'm back there. And so I think the South, what it means to me is it's a complicated place, but there's a lot of wonderful people that we want to support and engage and empower as best we can. And if you can do it in the South, you can probably do it anywhere because of just the barriers that exist there. So I think the South is simultaneously a place of great struggle, but also a great place of great promise as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with all of that more. I think the South is complicated. That's the best word for it. At the same time, you know, I've driven across this country a couple times now, and it's true. The people in the South on a day-to-day basis are nicer than anywhere else. People say hello to each other. They open doors for each other. At the same time, we're extremely private. We like to keep to ourselves, and unfortunately that plays out a lot in our politics and in our laws, and in this case is hurting our community.
Whenever we're kind of like opening this conversation up, a lot of the reason why this conversation is so important is because unlike other states that have legalized through ballot referendums, that's not an option in North Carolina or in most of the South. You have to work through legislators within their general assemblies. So being a little bit more comfortable with having these conversations, kind of eliminating that stigma that you have internally about cannabis is really crucially important. So being Southerners that all work in the cannabis space, I'd love to toss it around equally and be like, what work have you done internally? What was kind of like your realization of how you got to the point where you're just like so comfortable with talking about cannabis as a Southerner?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so, just preparing for this panel, I've been thinking a lot about my own family history. And so my father worked close to 30 years in a factory manufacturing cigarettes. And I think something that's very hard for me to kind of think and, accept is I feel like so many things that exist in our country and beyond are criminalized due to arbitrary or just really BS reasons. And so my father doesn't have a college degree, he had a high school degree, went to work in the factory. There's also a possible reality where that wasn't the track he took. He could have taken a track that was focused on more in line with marijuana and cannabis, and that could have meant that he could be in jail and prison. And so I think for me, it's just realizing how many of our lives are one decision, one thing away from being in a position that we don't deserve to be in. So it's kind of by chance that that's where he was able to be on. But we should make sure that everyone's able to be free and be liberated and not have any fear of being criminalized due to things that help get them through existence. So I think for me, that has been incredibly important to my journey to marijuana, cannabis legislation, and all the things that we're talking about now today, and as well for me as well just the pandemic. And it's been, especially for me, managing anxiety and trying to get through the day to day. So just making sure that I understand my own journey with it, and also understanding others as well that have experiences that go beyond mine. That's kind of a crucial connection point for me to kind of do this work now in this day and age.
Yeah, I feel like anybody who does this work has both a personal and a professional appeal to it, right? So for me, I started practicing law in criminal defense. So I've defended people who were charged with marijuana offenses day in, day out. And
things that need to change in legislation to like actually match with reality. So including not only like scientific fact, but also like the will of the people. I was listening to the channel before and how folks were talking about what a popular, I don't know, idea or whatever it is to like legalize cannabis is just get rid of these silly restrictions, but that the legislators don't feel like they need to take that into account when they're taking money from, you know, big business who's pushing this cannabis legalization. So, you know, it's hard to sit in an intersection where like you're benefiting from all of this privilege that ostensibly like not being in jail at all, right? Not being in jail and smoking weed, like I'm sitting in a place where I know other people would be if they could. And so to use the freedom, to use the privilege I have in that space to really bring these issues up everywhere that I can, every time that I'm smoking weed with folks, to just acknowledge that and build within ourselves a defiance and a need to resist that hypocrisy and the pain that's being caused, the harm that's being caused in our name. Like, it doesn't protect me to put anybody in jail for me at all. You're not speaking for me, you know? And so just to really have a voice in that and continue to learn all I can about how to be the most effective voice in that space, occupying the space I do, I feel like is what has brought me and sustains me in the work.
Yeah, I would add on to that. I think you illustrate one of the things that's so unique about the South. Like when we talk about the reason legislators don't represent the will of the people on this topic, the will of the people in the South is not uniform. Cannabis in the South is tied to religion, it's tied to race, it's tied to morality, it's tied to so many things that are not reflected in national politics. And so in the Southeast, when we're talking about prohibition, it's a lot more complicated than it is in the Midwest or certainly the West.
When as more and more states are developing cannabis policy law, they're like opening up retail sales and required trade licensing. Social equity has become a word that I feel like I didn't hear at all whenever we was first legalized out west, but now something that anyone, specifically in the justice space, I mean, it's kind of like the highest or top priority that, you know, creating opportunities in the space means thinking back into, you know, creating opportunities for individuals that were caught up in the war on drugs or that got caught up in the justice system, or that even smaller businesses should be able to participate in the space as opposed to like a larger organization. So I'd love to kick this question over to Evan and say, you know, given that Virginia is the first state in the South to legalize for adult use with social equity as a part of that legislation, can you tell me a little bit about what you think those conversations that you've had to prioritizing social equity, or can you talk to me at all about how it was ensured that social equity was included in this bill?
Yeah, you know, I think for us in Virginia, we still have a ways to go regarding social equity, but and last year, 2021, we were excited to have some form of legalization occur in the Commonwealth, and I think a lot of that was kind of due to just some factors that were just lined up in a way that couldn't even really plan for. Our governor at the time, Ralph Northam, had a blackface situation where he was from his college days at BMI. And so people, organizers around the state were really mobilized to try to make sure that they could take advantage of that moment and make sure to get some gains as far as his own policies and making sure that social equity was a component in the Commonwealth in some way or fashion. So without those things lining up in that way and that timing, you know, who knows where we are today, but you know, we had to build this, still in this General Assembly that would have sped up the market for retail sales. That bill failed, but you know, it was also going to add new crimes to marijuana possession. That's not something that we're willing to accept as an organization of marijuana justice. We think that, you know, there's a certain order of things that should happen when you're talking about legislation. When I was in you know, elementary school, I don't know if anyone remembers the PEMDAS or Order of Operations. You have to do things in a certain order. We need to get people out of prison. We need to get reparations. We need to repair communities that have been harmed for decades by the war on drugs. And so to do anything that would speed up retail sales but doesn't have those components part of it, that's simply not acceptable. So for us, that's kind of where we are right now. And unfortunately, just a week or so ago, our new governor is now trying to add amendments to add more marijuana possession crimes. And this is a battle we're trying to fight this upcoming week as well. So the battle continues, but no matter what, we're going to do our best every single day to make sure that we're advocating for radical liberation with all forms of legislation that come out in Virginia.
Thank you. And we obviously have our unbridled support heading into next week. Good luck with this conversation. So under the considerations of obviously, there are, whenever we're prioritizing release, we're prioritizing equity licensing and everything like that. I'd love to hear from Isaiah with what you do as political, and I don't hear from else, but if you were to decide on social health or social equity provisions, what would you want to see in your legislation? But if you could kind of prioritize your own, what would you like to see first? And why?
Possession should not be a crime. Period. That has to come first. Because the amount of people who are charged with crime, even if it's just a fine, even if it's, decriminalization is this interesting word, right? It means different things in different states. The state of North Carolina is technically decriminalized. It's still a criminal conviction if you are found guilty. You might only get a fine, but it's still a criminal conviction on your record. And the collateral consequences from that are completely unacceptable and are far worse than the fine you're going to get. And so possession cannot be illegal anymore.
I'm racking my brain for what I believe the most or something, or which one I should pick. I think possession not being illegal is feels like a given, you know what I mean? This person in this last panel from the back was hollering it shouldn't be a problem at all, and I sit in that space. I'm it's so hard for me to be oh well, I hope they really expunge the records but keep the records. I'm I believe that we are capable of a higher plane of existence, right? I believe that we are able to understand the ways that this plant, let's just say, is really not harming anyone, and that where the money leads you is a whole lot of harm that's being caused to us. And it feels like such nonsense that to pick a policy feels really hard for me, but I think that immediate expungement, the minute your state legalizes fucking weed, how are you carrying a record? That's immediate. It's no longer a law to be they broke, So that's what I'll say. My final answer.
I'm curious, working in the cannabis space, working in the cannabis law space, what would you say, do you think larger companies are prioritizing social equity? Do you think it's something that's on their radar that they think about as much as the people kind of here at the advocacy level do?
No, larger companies are not prioritizing social equity. And I think you can see that across the board. If you look purely at the demographics, it's not reflected in their hiring policies, in their ownership policies. If you look at even some of the social equity policies and licenses that have been handed out, for example, New York. So New York was touted as one of the first states to really push social equity. Their medical licenses that they handed out, the majority of them are owned by the same 10 companies that own medical licenses in almost every other state. And if nobody's told you there's a monopoly coming. The one license that they gave to a New York-based company with social equity in mind was just bought out by one of the large companies. Now, that's not that company's fault. They have the right to sell if they want to. But it begins to ask the question of what kind of conditions were they having to operate in that made it so that they had to sell. So, no, large companies are not putting social equity on the radar.
Yeah, I would just say that, I think we have to understand the premise of why certain organizations exist. You have places that are trying to make money, and you have places that are trying to get people free. Marijuana justice, for example, we're working to hopefully have one day where it's possible where our work is not hopefully as needed in some way, but a business wants to grow, wants to collect as much wealth as possible, and that is not something that's ever going to prioritize people and communities over their profit. So, corporations are not going to act in the best interest of people. Other organizations can and will do that. I think also need to be aware that these organizations, these companies are very strategic in what they do and how they go about their practices. So they will hire or put people on their board that might be a community in some way, might know how to engage with other people, and then they'll try to build up some trust with you, but at the expense of your actual community for their own profit. So I think you have to have a certain level of critique and doubt and skepticism when you're seeing how these places move and operate, and make sure that it's being people-centered, and just make sure that that's a conversation, a narrative that is put on and talked about as much as possible.
just jump on the back of that and say that I think too the ways that we protect our community is by knowing our community and being really intentional about how we spend time with one another and how we care for each other. I think especially in the midst of conflict, I think especially in the midst of healthcare crises and COVID and like just the ways that communities can come together. And I find that weed is actually a really great way that I find community and way that I come together with my folks, which is that like prioritizing the need that we have as a community to be there for each other so that we can do these larger steps of like advocating for our communities and protecting our communities from the harms of these big businesses and things like that. So just like a plug for like, book with your friends, talk about stuff, which we all pretty much probably do. Anyway.
Talk to your friends, smoke, and then pick up the phone and all call your representatives together. Some funny voicemails. Oh yeah, so we were talking about personal impact. I think we kind of briefly touched on the idea of like the community impact surrounding policing. What do you think that like the human cost is? You're financially, you're human, but like what do you think the cost is of our communities criminalizing cannabis and by policing cannabis possession?
I think the impact, is you're greatly changing people's lives, and in a way that is traumatizing. It's a way that you're putting people on the paths that they would otherwise not have to be on. And so, having a situation where now your housing is harder to find, now some people can be deported. These are very high stakes for having marijuana cannabis be the way that it is in most of the country. So I think people sometimes think about progress being this linear path of things going to get better every day, every week, every year. And that's just simply not the case necessarily. You can have things be good, then go right back to the way it was, or even get worse. So unless we're taking the steps every single day to treat our progress as not guaranteed to something that's very fragile, that's going to be something that we need to figure out as a community to make sure that those who are most at risk of these harms are able to be in a place where not only will they get out of those harms, but they're not going to be at the risk of being back in those places ever again in their lives.
Yeah, and I think it fosters distrust. In North Carolina, when hemp and CBD became legal under industrial hemp, there was a big pushback from law enforcement against smokable hemp. And the argument was that they would no longer be able to use the smell of the odor of marijuana as a reason to conduct searches and seizures. And agreed, oh well. And so eventually they lost that fight. But it's so ingrained that they felt very comfortable getting up and saying, if you take this away from us, we won't be able to use that as a way to search people. And that's, when you think about that, they're saying it's our number one way of saying that there's an odor of marijuana for us to search or seize. And they had no issue saying that out loud. And that kind of deep-seated distrust, that kind of deep-seated belief that it's okay, it's really toxic.
That it's okay to kidnap people from their homes, that it's okay to take parents away from children, that it's okay to dismantle communities, that it's okay to rip families apart, that it's okay to deport people, something that is legal in half of this country, that it's okay to do those things. This is the human cost, is that children grow up in foster care because somebody decided to call the cops on somebody smoking weed, maybe or maybe not smoking weed. Like the human cost, the human toll is that it's the police and prison were invented to extend slavery and to systematically disrupt and cause harm to Black communities and other communities of color. And so that is the human cost. The human cost is like the attempt, I'm gonna say the attempt at the decimation of a culture that can't be actually decimated, that can't be actually buried because you just can't do that. And so what ends up happening is we just keep trying, and then we get stronger as a result, and we come together because we believe in each other, we know we need each other, and then they lose. And then we get free. And so that's my trajectory. I don't know if that was the question, but no, this was wonderful. Thank you.
We have a couple minutes left. I wanted to just print a little bit about as states in the South have started to legalize a lot. We see the kind of faces, right? they start medicinal, then they move into adult use. A lot of states in the South that are legalizing are using these very limited licensing structures. This very restrictive business setup. Courtney, can you tell us a little bit more about those structures and what it means for like emerging cannabis markets in the Southeast?
Yeah, so most of the South and the North, when they're looking at opening licensing, they're looking at giving out very few licenses. The hurdles to get a license are large. They require a lot of cash on hand. They require a certain amount of expertise. They require a lot of planning and strategy to be done up front and presented before it can be approved. And the dirty little secret that they don't tell you is a lot of times before they even pass the licensing regulations, they've already been lobbied so heavily by large companies that they know already who they're giving those licenses to. And that's the problem with the sort of lack of transparency in the way that these regulations are passed, and the lack of input from the public.
Very limited licensing and will be expanded for adult use, or what's going on? Because I know that's all still in flux, but like what's the current state?
Yeah, we're trying to fight as best we can to make sure we can get as many people as possible these licenses, so that the people that have built the marketplace in our state can also continue to participate in the marketplace in any way that they want, and in a safe and good way. A lot of language that comes out of our representatives, they'll call the market the illicit market, the black market. That's not terms that we use. Those are unnecessarily negative and it's just disgraceful to use that language to describe something that creates a community and is also just really negative towards mostly black and brown communities. So for us, we want to make sure that people have as much access as possible in the marketplace. And unfortunately, though, it seems like that's something that's going to be continuously an uphill battle to get that to where it needs to be.
I think we kind of already touched on this in terms of the social equity piece. But I guess, yes, if there were to be a policy in bringing stone tomorrow that you got to select, what would be the top of your list? What would be your very first thing? Do it. I want to know. What are your dreams?
Decriminalize and release everyone.
Yeah, I want everyone out of prison now. And I think, we've had conversations here in prepping for this about other things alongside that. And I don't know exactly what this could be, but there needs to be some deeper acknowledgement by the state, by our governments about the level of harm that they have caused to our communities. It can't just be something where they'll write something in pen and then feel like, oh, we did something and enjoy us now and celebrate us. That's not good enough. So, getting people out of prison, reparations. I think having people that have been most impacted by these most by criminalization should be the people that are telling them, what they need to rectify the situation. So I think a lot of times we kind of rely on people that are in between, but we need to rely on the communities themselves to define what their liberation should look like.
I would say when it comes to licensing, first and foremost, an emphasis on social equity, but also an emphasis on local. There are a lot of people who start in hemp and CBD for the hope of eventually getting into cannabis above 0.3% THC. And the way that it's run now, they have no chance. And I think that's a real shame. And cannabis is about community, and it should be about the local community as well.
If I could add one more thing.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it as y'all were speaking. Just addressing the internalized piece, this idea that prisons make us safe, which is not true and not been proven and has been disproven. The idea that weed is bad for us and that we're not good people if we use weed, or and that there could, I feel like I'm just dreaming, but there could be some if you want to be a lawmaker, you have to understand the racist history of this country. Some kind of training program, maybe a video series. I don't know. This is an idea.
Wrap up with, because this is a heavy topic, this is all phenomenal points, but I would like to wrap up with just a really happy question. How did you find
want to start with something I wanted to say earlier that is not an answer to that question, and then I'm going to end on something more positive.
Go for it.
So one stat that I just want to share to kind of illustrate where things have been in Virginia. 50% of the people that have been logged for marijuana possession from July 1st, 2020 to January 11th of 2021 were black. So 50% were black, but only black people are only 20% of the population of Virginia. So I think for a lot of people, there's again this notion of with the police, there are a few bad apples, or there's some level of bad apples. Either there are a few bad apples and they're really bad, there are a lot of bad apples, or the entire institution needs to be changed or abolished in some way. So for marijuana justice, we're about the fun of the police, and we need to make sure we look at the history of these institutions and stop trying to act like this was more time and patience for what it takes things. We're in 2022. How many decades do we have to go through where this incremental change is good enough? That's not good enough. We're still in a pandemic. We've lived through a pandemic. The time is of the essence right now. Let's make sure we guarantee the safety of our communities. So that is also happy. Envisioning that makes me very happy. Beyond that, I'm very excited to just walk around, explore more. I love to dance. I haven't been in a space like this in forever. So as my booty shaking later, that's what's happening.
Feel overjoyed to be meeting folks who feel a similar passion for the work that I've dedicated my life to, and that it's that community that I feel like is, like I probably said at some point, what I think is gonna like actually do the work of changing what we see happening with weed in this country, is like that we care about each other and respect each other enough to like understand we're all impacted by the criminal legal system, we're all impacted by prisons and policing. Even if you're not directly impacted, you know someone who is, and just like it brings me so much joy to get to be around y'all and get to talk about that with y'all. And I hope I get to talk about it with y'all more as this panel is over and later if we run into each other. But just appreciate folks being here. It's bringing me so much joy.
So we're gonna start Q&A here in a second. Just to kind of wrap, obviously everyone here has really, really phenomenal points. If you live in the Southeast, where you have family members in the Southeast, or in a state where they're unable to vote on marijuana reform through referendum, so have them find out who their state representatives are. They work for us. They need to be giving us this time to talk about this issue. Yeah, I hope that we have a phenomenal festival. So we'll launch into the Q&A if anyone has any questions. No pressure. Actually don't know. Oh, okay. There we go. Okay.
How can the South work together to bring, I've been in the late talk about this, but how can like Southern states work together to build some type of momentum of how different it's going to be to legalize in the South?
Do you want me to take it? Oh, okay. So the question was, what can Southern states do to work collaboratively, to work together in order to get, it sounds like the change we want implemented.
Something that works in the South and has for a very long time that doesn't necessarily work in other places is grassroots. The organizations that you're seeing represented on this panel in front of you, they're doing incredible work in the South. And that's more often than not, it's the communities coming together. It's not the representatives. And that's really, I think, what I see as the most momentum in the South is the organizations who are spearheading it, but it's the local communities coming together and saying this is what we want and moving together to accomplish that.
I think there needs to be a level of optimism and hope when it comes to this sort of work. I think a lot of times people kind of assume the worst or think that things just aren't going to be possible. How many things have we seen in our own lifetimes, let alone others' lifetimes, where if you could imagine that thing happening in the future, that would seem inconceivable in some way. So I think we have to demand the existence that we should have. And I think a lot of times a lot of organizations might be more willing to compromise, be more patient. Why? Let's just put our lines in the sand, not accept anything less than what we deserve, and fight as best we can, mobilize others, build coalitions, and create the reality that we should all have. Well, I think when we are a little bit too patient legislation a little bit too willing to prioritize other stealings over the literal lives of people, that's where we get into some trouble. So,
I love this question. I think that there are at least 3 levels I'm thinking of it on initially. And I think that institutionally as organizations, we can ask ourselves, how are we positioning ourselves to be collaborative? So what are we doing as an organization or as an institution to reach out to other organizations, institutions? And what do we do when we find that we're not overlapping exactly? Like, how do we live in that space where it may not be an exact fit? How do we stay open to collaboration? And I think interpersonally, like, talking about like rigor, like how do we hold each other rigorously accountable in love? Because ultimately I don't think we can do any of this work outside of love. There's no reason why. Why would we? And then I think internally, I think that we all have things that we've heard and internalized over the course of our lifetime that make us think we're bad or we're not good enough or we don't deserve the wins of our work, of our labor, and that to open ourselves up to more ideas than just that these negative thoughts should run our ship, even if it's like these negative thoughts are running us to be successful at the work of creating justice, whatever. If we are motivating ourselves through fear or a lack of understanding or compassion for ourselves, that internal work is just as crucial as anything that we could ever do the moment we sort of step outside of ourselves. So I think I love that question.
And I guess to just kind of like add to that, I think, especially whenever I think about the groups that just kind of like work collaboratively and may not be entirely overlapped. We can all agree on a couple of these crucial elements: is that no one should be arrested, adults should be able to access, and I feel like with a lot of legislatures in the Southeast, we're working with this perspective of like marijuana is still a gateway drug. If you legalize it, your kids will get it and then they'll die, or some other like ridiculousness. It's our responsibility to break stigma. It's our responsibility to have conversations, to be getting out into the communities and to be talking about how it impacts. Because the truth is, for a lot of folks, we got into this because we're so impassioned by it, but some individuals that are interested in cannabis could also sometimes kind of take it or leave it. And whenever you have a situation where people are getting taken away from your children, whenever you have a situation where individuals are getting arrested every 90 seconds, that's really unacceptable. So, I think it's a lot of conversation building and being able to collaborate and actually kind of organize it.
How can the states in the South design maybe safeguard the industry so it doesn't kind of head in the direction of the industry in Colorado or the industry in California? Oklahoma, for example, all those industries are an absolute disaster at this point. So how can, like Virginia, for example, how can we manage that?
So the question is how we can design Southern states industry or industries that are markets that so that we're maybe learning from the lessons or the accidents from out west. We'll play with the mistakes.
I'm not ready to pay that.
I would say overall, we sometimes our representatives act as if there are people already that are presenting legislation for us or have solutions that will make things a lot more equitable in some way. We've seen the mistakes that have been made across the country on different areas regarding marijuana and cannabis. We cannot do those things. We can listen to people who are in community and have spent their lives trying to create and draft legislation that would greatly improve the community safety in some way. And I think it requires those leaders to listen and to stop trying to do the thing on their own. I think it's act as if they're experts on all these things. They are not experts. They don't know. They're just following the interests of whoever's getting their ear, the lobbyists and things like that, not the community. And so if you listen to the community will always, eventually with time, create the solutions that work best for itself, I think.
Yeah, I mean, education. What legislators do is they take what's presented to them as what already works and they adopt it, right? This industry didn't exist 10 years ago. And so we expect a lot from them in saying that they need to regulate an entire industry and do it right from the beginning. It's a high expectation. And it's not that we shouldn't have the high expectation, but unless
answered something about like calling a spade a spade. Like, why are small farmers, and in my state specifically, black and brown farmers being denied access? Like, say what's actually happening. Like, when we're in these public forums, when we're in spaces with people who have power and people who don't, like remembering like this is a systematic function of white supremacy, that like black and brown people are intentionally being excluded from these negotiations. So it's not an accident or like a mistake. I don't think, not words I would use. I think it's like really intentional what's happening, and that we can have teeth in this work. Like we can be like, no, this is unacceptable. I believe it in my bones. Like we can't keep doing this. I cannot keep participating in a system and allowing a system to continue that is like explicitly and obviously doing these things that we can all see. So I think it's about being loud and being strong in what we believe. If you're at any level of cannabis industry, I think myself as sort of outside the industry, so I'm stretching a little bit, but I think if anybody inside of any institution, anybody inside of an industry who doesn't believe in the ways that it's working, you have the power to talk to each other, you have the power to talk to people in charge, you have the power to take away your compliance in those systems, and calling it every day what it actually is helps you stay strong, knowing who's the enemy and who's not. People who disagree with you but are over here at National Council, probably not the enemy, right? Like how can we come together to identify that like these big businesses are very intentionally excluding people that they want to keep in a place of disadvantage. So I think just calling it what it is like, in addition to these other things, like a really important step for me.
Any other questions? Okay.
I have two thank yous. Number one, I just want to thank the ASL interpreters and International Cannabis Festival for having more access to these panels in different places. Thank you for your time and labor. I forgot the second one, but thank you all for being here. Thank the panel. I'm so happy to know you all more.
Thank you everybody for attending our session, and thank the panelists and the moderator. The next session will be 3:15. We're going to be about Mission 71, 7 years, and where are we at?